Anthea and Mark Lima. Anthea and Mark are the parents of 6 children. They have a lot of experience in assisting people with disabilities and their families to pursue options in the community. Mark and Anthony will share their story regarding why and how their son Cameron created a small business called CamCan.
Thanks, Cameron. We'd just like to start by thanking Deb, Rosé and PLA and the organising committee for inviting us here to tell our story. We don't quite come as far as some of you, from people from Canada and so forth, but if you know where Western Australia is in Perth, then you know it's a fair way as well. It's almost as far as Canada. Sorry? Okay, thanks a lot. So the way we do this is we have a bit of a tag team strategy, not unlike the people this morning. I'll introduce our family. Anthony will talk about Cameron's life in the early days. We'll talk a little bit about his experience in the education system in Western Australia, and I don't know whether it's similar here, but it was a pretty tough 13 years that we went through. We'll talk about Cameron and his what we call Cam Support Crew. It's a group of people that get together regularly to help Cam and us plan for Cam's future. And then Anthony will talk to you about Cameron's life as it is today. Just wanted to tell you why Cam's not here today. Cameron's a very shy man, and this would be a nightmare for him, as it is for us often. So, and he also is non-verbal, and thankfully he's at work, so he's pretty busy. Okay, this is the crew. Alistair is 19. Damien up the corner here is 29. Rebecca is 25. I struggle to remember all the names. Troy is 26. Cam up the corner there, he is 21. And this little angel down here is Olivia, she's 5. So I'll hand you over to Anthea and she'll talk to you a little bit about Cameron's first few years.
Hi everybody. It's really, I feel, important to share a little bit about Cameron when he was young, just so you have some background of the experiences he had and to know how far he's come. When Cameron was born, he actually was born with an intellectual disability, although it took me quite a few years to accept that, always believing that that might not have been the case. During Cam's early years, life was interesting because the path was that actual family became a little isolated at a very early stage. Cameron received lots of therapies from a very early time. I suppose when he was 2, he started to develop a backpack of labels. So actually he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at the age of 2, which was fairly convenient because it meant he was able to access therapy services. However, he really has an intellectual disability. Cameron had some physical disabilities as well. He has a sight impairment and a squinting eye, so that was corrected. His feet were turned in, so that was surgically corrected. But there were the interventions of many professionals at that time of his life, so we spent many years travelling between hospitals and therapies. Attended physiotherapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with those kinds of services and the kind of life that you as a family have when you are undergoing all of these. We were home a fair bit, and our home actually became a bit of a therapy centre because we had, you know, special swings and all sorts of equipment for Cam to learn to stand in. And just some of the pictures behind actually show the swing we had at home up here to help Cam gain some balance, because he was actually 4 before he was able to walk. He's quite mobile now, but very uneasy still. Cam also was part of an experiment where therapists were trialling what they called an upsuit at the time, which was supposed to help his muscles to mimic standing. That was this picture down here. And everything that Cameron did in terms of even going for a swim became swimming therapy. Unlike like Olivia, his little sister, she goes to swimming lessons and maybe even a plan for the pool, but for Cam it was therapy. Cam also unfortunately started developing some behaviours that did become entrenched, and unfortunately that included grabbing of hair, and it did become a problem. But unfortunately Cameron's life was, he had many people who cared about him, and people I guess felt sorry for him, so he started to fill that pity model. And although, you know, someone would say to him, Cam, don't grab or don't do this, it was never followed up perhaps as strongly as it should have been, and some of these behaviours became quite problematic throughout his school years and even prior to that. As I mentioned, our family life became quite isolated too, and Cameron attended segregated kindies and segregated, it was special playgroup, etc. Although Cameron was learning lots of things at the time, he was actually very good at studying people, so he learned to read people really well and save some particular behaviours for those that he liked and didn't like. There's some experiences that also happened once we started school. Cam was not an easy person to take for a walk or to, you know, just go to the shops. They're not the kind of places that interested him, and he gets fairly tense around crowds. But even going for a walk in the neighbourhood was a little difficult because just the noise of the traffic, and also because once Cam was out having a look around, enjoying everything that was out there, taking advantage of seeing the passing planes and so forth, he didn't always want to come home, but the fact was we couldn't stay out all day. And I do recall one particular occasion, we went for a walk and we came to a roundabout, and I tried to navigate him to bring him back home, because that's the only way I could do it. If I said to him we're going to go home, that would have resulted in a tantrum of sorts. As it was, he was pretty cluey to this roundabout trick, and halfway around the roundabout decided, no, he's not going to do that, and turned on the usual little lay yourself on the ground and carry on. And my remedy for that was to ignore it, and then, you know, when he sees me walking off home, he's going to realise that he'll just come too. But during that process, a car came around the corner, and this lady jumped out very energetically, and she asked me if she could help to get Cameron home. She said, I'm used to working with animals, I'm a vet, and jump in the car. Anyway, on that note, I'll hand you over to Mark to talk a little bit about the school years.
Yeah, you wouldn't think you'd hear stories like that. I mean, that wasn't that long ago when that happened. It was pretty bizarre. But anyway, Cameron's school life was pretty difficult. His primary school, he went to a segregated primary school. And just before he was to go to high school, we thought we'd better take a breath and see what was going on in his life. And look, right now I'd just like to acknowledge that families like ours, and I'm sure families that you've met or you are a family, really do need support to go through this very difficult times. And we're very fortunate in Western Australia to have a lot of very supportive people. And I noticed that one of those people who supported us and inspired us to carry on through this process is actually here today, and I just wanted to acknowledge the very important work that a man named Darryl Wills does in Western Australia through his organisation called Pledge. But very importantly to us, he inspired us to keep going, even though it was very, very, very hard for us. So I thank him for that. At this point, just before he went to high school, we had to take a little breather and say, what's going on here? He's not really been educated. He's not developing relationships or friendships. Nothing's actually going on here. So we thought we kind of thought of his life and compared it with our other children's lives, and we kind of used this sort of to make it clear for us, a bit of a train track going this way with our other children. You know, they were obviously born, there was a lot of congratulations, there was health nurses, there was local play schools, good assumptions that he'd go to that the children would go to kindy, and there was lots of invitations to parties and et cetera, et cetera. With Cameron's life, though, there were lots of nurses, specialists, As Anthea said, everything became therapy. There was sympathy rather than congratulations. There was a real risk of inclusion, and it started very early in his life. He entered this thing we call human servicehood pretty quickly. There were specialised playgroups. He couldn't even go to daycare without help and support because nobody would accept him. The possibility of social isolation was there, and he was directed to specialised education. The problem with all this, of course, was that we saw his life detouring from where the other kids were, and if it continued to happen, the likelihood of institutionalisation was real for Cam. That was absolutely unacceptable for us. We didn't want that to happen for him. We don't want that to happen for anybody. So we decided that there was a moment that we had to do something different, and that moment was then. We needed to as quickly as we could, get that railway track back up to where the other kids were. And the longer that you leave that deviation, the greater it becomes and the more difficult it is to get back up there. So he went to high school and we took him out of the segregated school with support from people like Darryl and Dr. Jackson in WA. And who told us to do that? The system was absolutely outraged that we would even consider Cameron going to his local school, given the challenges that he posed to the system. But we persisted and persisted and persisted. And finally they said yes, he could go to his local high school, but he had to be in an ed support setting, which was a lot better than where he was. Cameron, driving past the school with little kids, looking through a fence, seeing the other kids at the typical primary school was heartbreaking. So we really wanted him to be part of his school. He went to Leaming High School in the ed support facility there, but at least he was part of, typical life, typical kids. We pushed very hard for him to be included in things like phys ed and the things that he could do and was meaningful to him. They pushed back, we pushed harder, and eventually they agreed that he could do some of those things. We spent 5 or 6 years, however how long it was in high school, and we would have been at a meeting at least once a week, if not more. Those meetings that you go to where there's a cast of thousands, you're the parent sitting there with all these professional teachers and psychologists and district directors and et cetera, it's very intimidating. But again, with the support of some people in Western Australia, we pushed on. And in fact, a quick story about high school. At one point, they suspended Cameron for a few days, and Cameron couldn't put the dots together. He didn't know what he did yesterday and, would have a connection with what happened the following day or days to come. So we were pretty outraged. So we went and had another meeting, with all the people. And the district director was invited then because the principal didn't care for me very much. So I finally, after probably 3 hours, got them to agree that suspension for any child was a bit bizarre anyway. But certainly for a child with what they described as a profound intellectual disability was even weirder, really. So they agreed not to do that. A couple of weeks later, guess what happened? They suspended him again. And in those days, Cameron's behaviour was extreme. I mean, it was very difficult to even get him ready for school. It used to take us about 3 hours. So we were up very early in the morning because he didn't want to comply with anything. And quite frankly, I don't blame him. Anyway, I did this 3 hours worth of preparation, and just before we got in the car, I noticed a little note in his bag saying that he had been suspended. I think they were too scared to tell me on the phone. I said to Anthea, I don't care, I'm taking him anyway. So I took him to school, I took him to his class, turned around, and as I was leaving, the teacher came bolting out of the classroom to tell me that he had been suspended. And I said, no, we had agreed that that wasn't going to happen again. By the time I got to the car park, the district director was on the mobile phone saying to me to go and pick him up. And I hung up on him and went to work. Well, that threw the cat amongst the pigeons, that's for sure, because the next day we were back at a meeting again, and I think there was just about as many people in that room as there is in this one. And so, one of the things that taught me is that you have to learn more about their system than they know. And I did that. I knew everything about legislation, again, with the help of people like Daryl and Bob. We knew everything there was to know. And what we didn't know, we just bluffed our way through. We just put the documents in front of us and pretended that we did know. And that kind of spooked them a little bit. But anyway, the district director said, I want you to know that this is going to stand and Cameron will be suspended. At the end of another 3 hours, we actually got them to agree to lift the suspension, and the principal had to write to us and apologise for his behaviour, which was unheard of in those days. So that was fantastic. I loved it. It was great. I think we still got it home, framed it somewhere. So I'll hand you over to Ant, and she'll talk to you a little bit about some person-centred planning we did.
Just a little bit on those school years. We actually were lucky because we worked pretty hard to have Cameron included in some of the typical school subjects at that time, French being one of them for some reason or another. And I feel that was really beneficial for Cam, and I often think back for him how it must have been for all those years to be in an environment where he was not welcomed by the teachers, and he spent half of them outside the classroom sitting on a bench. You know, and then when he was in the classroom, he was actually in a classroom next to the classroom. I mean, it couldn't have felt good. And I guess all of that helped us to think that we really wanted something much more for him. When he finished school, he didn't deserve to live a life where he couldn't be part of community. And during those years as a family, it was pretty tough at home too. And Cam really pushed us at times, and in some ways I think that was the driving force for us being so determined to create a life that was going to be so much better for him in the long term. At that time, we were a little pressed for time too, so Cam's in the early years of high school, and we recognised there's only going to be 4 years till he's finished, and then what's the story going to be? We've just been introduced to the concept of person-centred planning. Are you all familiar with the person-centred planning processes? Most probably. Many of you might have been through that. And for us, it was a fantastic experience because it meant we could bring together people who perhaps were like-minded in thinking and also wanted really good outcomes for Cameron for the rest of his life. So we arranged this day and we gathered together friends and family, but the sad part of that was that Cam actually didn't have any friends. There were very few people who actually knew him, so mostly this group of people were family. There were a couple of people, one school teacher came along and a person who used to work as a support worker with Cameron. And I might touch a little bit there on support workers. We had very limited, small little bit of funding to assist with Cameron in those days. So that might have been just, you know, a few hours in the week, maybe 4 hours over a weekend. And the reason I mentioned that was this young support worker, when he went off and finished his uni studies, came back and chose to be part of Cam's life as a friend, and he still continues to be that person. Anyway, he was there at this planning day, which was just wonderful. You know, we had huge dreams. Cam was there. Although he doesn't articulate how he feels, you know, he relates fairly well with pictures and things. We had a great scribe and a really good facilitator, and yeah, they just did a wonderful drawing. The people down the bottom here are the family at the time and the few friends. And as planning days, person-centred planning process goes, we all had the big dreams, and amongst those things for Cameron were things like well, having a real job, maybe living in a home of his own one day. Cam loved to spend time down on the farm. We've got relatives who've got a property in the country, and he loves going down there, being part of that community as well, who've known him since he was very young. Cam loves being on the water, you know, so sailing was something we wanted to help him to achieve and stay with those kind of activities. He wanted to feel safe and secure, and I think primarily through everything in his life, we wanted to help him develop relationships, knowing that that was what was going to help keep him strong and safe and secure into the future. And certainly when we're no longer here, parents around the room, probably like me, from when Cam was quite young, would wonder, what's life going to be like for Cameron when I'm no longer here? And that's another factor that sort of, I think, continued to drive through everything we have done with Cameron. At the planning day, we had a family, as I mentioned. A lot of those people had great aspirations for Cam, as we did, but unfortunately, some of those people, I think were there to be part of the process but didn't actually believe that Cameron could achieve. And it was a very difficult time because we came out of that process with a lot of goals and actually didn't have the energy to bring those people on the journey. I really had to say, this is a very close family. Listen, if you can't believe what we're doing, we need to leave you behind. Be there, be a support, but we need believers. We need people who can help us on this journey. After the person-centred planning day, we started keeping in touch with people. I should say I started keeping in touch with people, and we had a newsletter and so forth. And it didn't take long to realise that to implement the things that we wanted to have happen, we needed an energetic group who are actually going to do things. So I'll leave you with Mark to follow on with the next bit of the story.
Yes, so we realised after the person-centred planning process that, we woke up the next day after everybody was energised and put their names on everything, that we were still just looking at each other and thought, everybody's gone home now. Nobody's here to help. So we thought we'd better get some help, some group of people together. And we did. We went about it. We were introduced to the concept of microboards. I don't know whether anybody's heard about that. It's just really just a small group of people that like-minded people that have an intrinsic value to be in the life of the family and the person with a disability, and really gather regularly to plan for that person's future and help that person not only plan, of course, because planning is just one aspect of having a good life. The other aspect is actually doing something about that plan, and they certainly have done that with us. Originally, the group was just family, and I'm very pleased to say now that there's 11 people in Cam's support group, and most of them aren't family members. They're friends of Cameron's and friends of ours, and they do a terrific job. These people have been gathering for about 6 or 7 years now, and we've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, I think, together. We were at one stage when we were creating CamCan and Associates, Cameron's business, meeting at least once a fortnight, and that went on for a couple of years. And the other thing I need to tell you about this group of people is that there is no money exchanged. This is all given freely. There's no grants, there's no government money. There's a lot of wine, there's a lot of food, there's a lot of fun, but there's no money. And there's a lot that can be achieved, and we'll talk a little bit about that without money, because we didn't have any. So it wasn't a hindrance to us when we were planning. One of the things that we did when early in the piece when we got this group together, and I think that held us in good stead, was that we created a set of principles that we intended to test every decision we made as a group against for CAM, to make sure that we were on the right track. And it's interesting, groups get together with a fantastic purpose and vision in mind. If you don't write it down, often that vision can get a little wobbly. Decisions are made because of whatever the factors are presenting at the time, and compromises are made in that person's life. We decided not to do that. One of the most interesting principles that we came up with, though, was that, and it's always controversial, especially to parents, was that everybody sat at the table with equal authority in relation to making decisions in Cameron's life. And as parents, that really challenged us. We came up with it, but it still challenged us. Because people said to us, look, if we're not here as equal partners in this, we could send you an email about some ideas, or we don't have to do this. We don't have to. If every decision's going to default to the parents, then our purpose here is compromised. So we decided that we wouldn't do that, and to be honest, 99% of the time this is not an issue. There have been times, though, and occasions where it has challenged us and has challenged our thinking. But we've stuck with it. It's right at the end there. All Cameron's crew will sit as equal authority. I think there was about 10 principles, because there's 10 commandments, so there should be 10 principles. Cameron's crew meet regularly. We share venues. This is a photo of Cameron. Once a year we go down to the farm with Cameron's support crew. So we hire a bus and pile them all in, and we go down to a farm because one of the support crew members actually lives on a farm in Pingelly, which is a couple of hours outside of Perth. So we make sure that everybody's included, and we share venues. One of the very quick stories I want to tell you about this group of people, remarkable people we think, is when Cameron was about to leave school, the principal at the time decided that he was too difficult to go on levers. You know levers? The rite of passage every young person has, where I think they go away and they get drunk and do stuff that you don't want to know about. Well, he said that Cameron was not going to be part of that process. And we were sharing that information with his support crew one day, and one of the young ladies, Em, who's, wrong picture, this lady here, she was listening. She's kind of Cameron's age, around Cameron's age, a couple of years older, and she remembered her levers with great fondness and was outraged that Cameron wasn't going to be included in something like that. She didn't say much at the meeting, but she went to work and she told her boss about what she was doing with Cam's crew and this story about Cameron not being able to go on levers. And her boss said, "I will pay you a week's wages if you make this happen for him. You don't have to come to work, you just make it happen." And you know, there's some incredible people out there, you just have to give them a chance, I think. And she did that. And they went, got some friends and got some of the young people, and they all went off and hired a shack somewhere down on the beach down south. Went to restaurants and did all the things that young people do, drank, and we would just put our fingers in our ears and said, "Don't tell us what you're up to." But it was fantastic. Cameron had levers, you know, and without this group of people, that would have never happened. And I think that is one of many, many stories we could tell you about these people, and we think they're fantastic and we love them dearly. We would have to put him in a day centre and leave him there. He would never be able to go into the community and so forth. So we're lucky in a way that they said that, because we said, no, that's not going to happen for Cameron. That's unacceptable also. But we were stuck in a way, you know, we were a family that kind of was under a fair bit of stress anyway, with all the kids and so forth and life in general. So we started pondering about what Cameron would do then. If there was no help, there was no support, there was very little funding, what could Cameron do when he left school? And we've painted a picture of Cameron, I guess, as a person who had, you know, expressed himself in an interesting way, no doubt. But anyway, long story short, at the time we were renovating our home, and it took about 18 months, big renovations, and we'd spent lots of time waiting for tradesmen and so forth. And the last straw was Foxtel. Anybody ever try to put the Foxtel on? It's really difficult, isn't it? So I rang the Foxtel people. They happened to be in Sydney, and they said, be home between 9 and 1 or 1 and 5. I said, you must mean on the weekends? And he said, no, we don't work on the weekends. And I said, but I work during the week. He said, oh, well, if you want the Foxtel on, be there. And as I was going through this conversation, I looked at Cameron, and he was sitting on the lounge, and Cameron was waiting for somebody to come and take him out. And I thought to myself, well, that's one of Cameron's skills. He's very patient, and he waits a lot. He waits for lots and lots of things. And I thought, this is an idea we can build a business around. So I took this idea to Cameron's crew, who looked at me like they always do when I come up with these ideas, and said, oh, not again, here we go. To their credit, they said, let's have a crack at this. You're right, this is one thing that he does well. So they developed a subgroup from the big group, and they spent lots and lots of time, again, drinking wine and eating food, but planning for Cameron's business. And somebody was asked what we'd call this thing, and one of the crew said, you know what I've heard, and she didn't know Cameron very well. We actually intentionally recruited her because she was a small business owner, and we didn't know anything about small business. Ooh, we better hurry up, 5 minutes to go, look at that. Anyway, so long story short, we took it to them. They created what's now known as CC&A, CamCan and Associate Professional Services. And basically, it's a personalised waiting service. So, again, here comes the commercial. If you've got tradesmen that you have to wait for, or something to be delivered, or whatever the case may be, Cameron will come and do the waiting for you so you can go to work. It's particularly good for people who are self-employed. And it's going really well. While Cameron's there waiting for you, he has a menu of things that he can do for you as well, for a fee, of course, because he's a small businessman. And those things are things like taking your cobwebs down, all the things that you don't want to do on the weekends, you know, take your cobwebs down, you know, trim your edges, get the oil off the driveway, those sorts of things. Cam does those. Cameron's business is now expanded into lots of different things. He has things like contracts for vending machines, and also cleans boats and all sorts of things. This is just an example of some of the things that we thought was really important. Some people call these things micro businesses. We don't use that sort of language because, unfortunately, I think language is very important, but those sort of words, sort of, you know, micro businesses, oh, I know what that is. It's for people with disabilities to keep them busy. We did not create Can Associates to keep Cameron busy. That's good, but we created it as a small business enterprise just like any other in this country. And its purpose is to have a meaningful job, but also to have money. You know, that thing that the gentleman before us was talking about. And it creates so many opportunities. And we're very grateful that Cameron's business is now turning a small profit, and our vision is within 5 years to be self-sustaining so that we could give the post-call options funding that we currently use to help him with his business back to the Disability Services Commission, because we don't want Can Associates to be at risk in terms of government policy changes and so forth. That's Cameron's website. If you are interested, camcan.com.au. Yep. And then you'll come up with that. So I'll hand you over to Anthea will very quickly tell you about some of the things that Cameron's up to.
Okay. And this will be really speedy. Can you flick through these?
Yep.
Yeah. So Cam's day, everyone says, how does his day look now? There's a whole another part to the story which we won't get to today, I don't think now. Cam lives in his own home, and how that all came to be is really, really interesting. But the things that Cameron does during the day now, he'll get up, get ready at home, he's got his responsibilities, things he has to do, gets ready for work, puts on his work shirt. I mean, they're a professional outfit now, you know, so they have got everything that any other business would have, including shirts, caps, and his whole equipment, you know, like toolbox. So while he's performing his other tasks, they might be raking leaves, cleaning cars. Cam's done a number of waiting jobs, and as a result has subsequent work. So people will call him back and ask if he'll come every 2 months and perhaps wash their car or whatever it might be, gardening. Cam also still goes down to the farm. He has jobs to do down there, and a whole other community that are very supportive of him and his business. Cam also does, up to there. He's done some voluntary work at the local yacht club, and that's now evolving into more work because people want their boats cleaned during the winter and the summer months. So that's the next arm that's developing. These are just some examples of flyers and posters and so forth. A really crucial part of Cameron's business are the support workers. So they're actually the quality control. So Cam still has days, of course, where he doesn't feel as good as other days. We're all like that too. And but it's always the support worker's role to be the quality assurance for the work that he does do. We find that the people who engage Cameron to work are very supportive of the job that he's doing. And I guess now that it's been perhaps 2.5, nearly 3 years that Cam's been doing this work, he's managed to bring his business closer to home, so he's working more in his local community. He's building relationships there. He also does voluntary work. There are people who are unable to go to the chemist perhaps and collect scripts, or they have the occasional few things they need from the grocery shop and can't get out of the home to do it. So he'll do those things for them as well.
Okay, yeah. So part of the business that we created for Cameron, again, we kind of reflected on his support crew and thought, guess what? We'll draw up a few principles, and they'll guide us in terms of what we will do with Cameron's business as well. And again, we came up with one that was a little controversial for people, and that is this notion of mutual benefit. A lot of people were very keen to give Cameron money for something. I wish they'd do it to me, but they were very keen to give Cameron's business money. And we didn't want to turn Cam Associates into a charity. This was a small business enterprise like any other. So the last principle down the bottom there about mutual benefit, if we can't find one, then we graciously decline the support. Cam Associates must complement the business that's offering the support. And just an example, a big, major advertising company, a marketing company in Perth came to us recently and said, we'd love to help you market CamCam & Associates. We said, yep, that'd be fantastic. They said, you won't have to pay us. We said, even better. But we said, we need to find a mutual benefit. And we have. And so Cameron's business now is complementing some of theirs. So very quickly now, I just wanted to tell you one of the things that really always gets me about this photo here. Cameron, when he was, before all this started happening, Cameron wouldn't look at you in the eye. He walked around, bent over, almost doubled. He was stubborn, very, very stubborn, to the point where it took 3 hours to get him ready for school and so forth. That's Cameron now, yeah? Looks you in the eye, smiles, is happy, has his own friends, his own business, his own home in the community. That's just fantastic. And I'll just very quickly show you some photos because I know we're running out of time. The other thing Cameron does is whenever he has a new customer, he leaves something for them. He'll leave a stubby holder, a pen, a little fridge magnet, something like that, and it does generate a lot of work. And of course at Christmas he'll send them a Christmas card. This is Cameron in his first year in business. We had a bit of a celebration. People like Eddie Bartnick, you may have heard Eddie Bartnick and so forth were there. That's Cameron's home. That's where he lives now. He actually moved out of our place and lives with a guy. Where is he? This guy here, Tupia. Tupia doesn't have a disability. One of the things that we were very clear about the support crew were clear about when we were planning for Cameron's move into his own place was that it had to be typical. It had to be a typical life experience for him like anybody else. He shares with Tupia. They get on like a house on fire. They've been living together for about 2.5 years. That's Cam on the phone. What else is there? Oh, we do this thing, mutual benefit again. For example, Tupia is the world's worst cook. I think he's worse than Cameron, and Cameron doesn't cook. And Cameron lives in his house, and one of the things that we did so he could spend some time on his own, because he never ever did, was we put some fire alarms hardwired into the house that are connected to our mobile phones, so that whenever, the smoke alarm goes off, the mobile phones go off, okay? Now, the lady next door, Irene, her phone goes off first, and then there's a series of phones that go off after. And we always know when Tupia's in the kitchen. Burning the steak. So we ring up and say, for God's sake, Tupia, get out of the kitchen. But now, Irene, who's a retired woman, lives next door, she cooks for them, and the guys do her gardening, yeah? So none of this is paid for again. We were very fortunate to learn a lot of lessons because we didn't have any funding. There's a lot of people in Cameron's life and in Cameron's home life now. Lots of friends that pop around. In fact, one of the people that, Sis Cameron started a community lunch on a Sunday afternoon where people in the community come along, and there's heaps of people now every Sunday lunchtime come along, not just people with disabilities, but just people in the community. It's fantastic, and it builds lots of relationships for Cam. Cameron's at the centre of everything. These people that are around him know the importance of including Cameron. We always worried that Cameron would be isolated. That is not the case at all. Cameron's right in the thick of everything. He has a great life, more friends than I know. And certainly I go around there these days and they say, who are you? I said, oh, I know this bloke, so. We had Cameron's 21st birthday recently down on the farm. A whole bunch of people showed up. So just in summary, there's a lot of things that are essential ingredients for making Cam's life the way it is now. The person-centered planning, the support crew, his work, his own home, all these are fantastic things that have transformed this bloke's life. From being a person that the system said would have to be institutionalised, would never work, would never contribute, would never have relationships outside of his family, and he's proved them all wrong, and we couldn't be more proud of him. I know that there are stories like this here in Victoria. You need to uncover them and share them because they're really, really important to other parents that are kind of not quite sure what to do yet, but are on the cusp of actually taking that leap. You've got to uncover them. We've been very lucky in a very small way to be part of a story here in Victoria, just not far from the city, a young man who's just moved into his own place. And that story is fantastic. You have to hear it. It's inspirational. Darianne's here somewhere in the audience, so catch up with her. It's fantastic. So thank you very much for listening to our story today, and thanks for inviting us.